Think about glow-in-the-dark stuff. Star stickers on a kid's ceiling, the hands of a watch, a cheap bracelet at a party. Totally harmless, right? Well, about 100 years ago, that magical glow came from something else entirely, a substance called radium. And the young women whose job was to paint it with brushes they were told to lick were being slowly poisoned to death. They were promised a glamorous dream job. What they got was a slow, agonizing death sentence, a company that lied to their faces, and a fight for justice that would end up protecting every worker who came after them. This is the story of the Radium Girls. To understand how this happened, you have to remember what radium meant back then. When it was discovered, radium was a sensation, a miraculous glowing element that seemed to defy nature. And because it was new and exciting, people assumed it was not just safe, but healthy. This is the wild part. Companies put radium in everything. Radium toothpaste, radium face cream, radium-infused water sold as a health tonic. It was marketed as a fountain of youth and energy. The eerie green glow wasn't a warning sign to people back then. It was a symbol of modern magic. Nobody understood that the glow was the sound of something invisible tearing cells apart. So when radium dial factories started hiring, it was seen as a fantastic opportunity. During and after World War I, there was huge demand for glowing dials, on watches, on clocks, on the instrument panels of military planes and ships so pilots and soldiers could read them in the dark. And the delicate work of hand-painting those tiny glowing numbers was given to young women, many of them teenagers, drawn from working-class towns. The pay was good, far better than a factory line. The work felt clean and modern, and the girls even got to glow. They'd come home from a shift shimmering faintly in the dark, dust from the paint clinging to their hair and clothes. They were called the Ghost Girls, and at first they thought it was wonderful. But there was a technique at the heart of this job that would prove catastrophic. To paint the tiny, precise numbers on a dial, the brush needed an extremely fine point. And the method the women were taught to keep that point sharp was simple. Put the brush between your lips, twirl it into a point with your tongue, dip it in the radium paint and paint. Lip, dip, paint. Hundreds of times a day. Which meant that hundreds of times a day, every single one of these women was swallowing a tiny amount of radium. When a few of them worried and asked if it was safe, they were reassured by the company that it was completely harmless. Some of the girls, trusting that completely, even painted their fingernails and their teeth with it to surprise their boyfriends with a glowing smile in the dark. The trouble started quietly, and it started in their mouths. One by one, the women began to notice aching teeth and sore gums that wouldn't heal. Then teeth started to loosen and fall out. When dentists tried to treat the damage, they were horrified. The women's jawbones were literally deteriorating, becoming brittle and breaking apart, a gruesome condition that came to be known as radium jaw. Sores refused to close. Infections set in. And the dentists and doctors were utterly baffled, because they had never seen anything like it, and nobody connected it to the pleasant, glowing paint these young women handled all day long. And it was only the beginning. As the months and years passed, the illness spread through their bodies in terrifying ways. Their bones grew weak and fragile. Women suffered spontaneous fractures, a leg or a hip breaking under the simple weight of standing or walking. Strange tumors appeared. Crippling anemia left them exhausted and wasting away. Young women in their 20s, who should have been in the prime of their lives, were becoming invalids, shrinking, suffering, and in some cases dying. And still, no one in a position of authority was telling them the truth about why. So what was actually happening inside them? Here's the cruel chemistry of it. Radium, it turns out, behaves in the body a lot like calcium, the mineral our bones are made of. So when these women swallowed all that radium, their bodies did the worst possible thing. They treated it like calcium and packed it into their bones. And once it was lodged deep in their skeletons, the radium sat there and did what radioactive material does. It relentlessly bombarded the surrounding bone with radiation, year after year, destroying it from the inside out. The very glow they'd found so beautiful, the glow they'd carried home in their hair, was now buried in their bones, quietly and constantly killing them. Now here is the part that turns this from a tragedy into a crime. The companies knew. Radium's dangers were increasingly understood by scientists, and the evidence strongly suggests the executives and chemists at these companies were well aware that the material was hazardous. How do we know? Because the people who handled radium in the labs and management, the ones who understood it, protected themselves. They used lead screens, they handled it with tongs, they wore masks and aprons. Meanwhile, the young women on the factory floor, the ones putting the brushes in their mouths all day, were told there was absolutely nothing to worry about. The company gave safety to the people who mattered to them and lies to the people who didn't. And when the women started getting sick and started asking dangerous questions about why, the company's response went from cowardly to downright monstrous. Rather than admit the truth and help them, U.S. Radium and others fought to protect themselves from any blame. In one of the cruelest moves imaginable, it's reported that the company floated the idea that the women's mysterious illnesses were actually caused by syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease. Think about what that means. Not only were these young women dying from a poison their employer had fed them, but that same employer was willing to publicly smear their reputations and their morals to avoid paying for it. They tried to make the victims look like the guilty ones. But these women did not go quietly. Led by a former dial painter named Grace Fryer, a group of the dying women decided to fight back and sue. It was almost impossible. Lawyers were reluctant to take on a powerful corporation, and the women were running out of both time and money. It took Grace 2 years just to find an attorney willing to represent them. And by the time they finally got their day in court, they were so ravaged by the radium that some of them physically could not raise their arms to be sworn in. They gave their testimony while dying, some too weak to sit up, telling the world exactly what had been done to them. It was one of the bravest legal fights in American history. And their courage broke the story wide open. The Radium Girls case became a national sensation, and the public was outraged by what had been done to these young women. Facing damning evidence and a horrified nation, the company was forced to settle. The women who were still alive won compensation, money for medical care, and for the lives that had been stolen from them. It could never undo what had happened. Most of them were already dying, and many did die young. But they had won. They had stood up to a powerful corporation that fed them poison and lied about it. And they had forced the truth into the light for everyone to see. But the most important thing the Radium Girls won wasn't their own settlement. It was everything that came after. Their case was a landmark that helped establish a worker's legal right to sue an employer for a disease caused by their job, something that had barely existed before. Their suffering directly fueled the creation of tougher workplace safety standards and occupational health laws. And the hard-won medical knowledge about what radium does to the human body went on to protect countless others, including the workers who would later handle radioactive materials in the atomic age. In the most heartbreaking way possible, these young women who were poisoned for painting pretty glowing numbers ended up saving an untold number of lives they would never meet. And there is one last haunting footnote to their story. Radium is relentlessly, almost eternally radioactive. The kind they carried has a half-life of about 1,600 years, which means the radium that settled into the bones of these women is still there, still radioactive to this day. Scientists who have studied their remains can still measure the radiation coming off of them, decades later. There's a romantic legend that the Radium Girls still glow in their graves. That's more poetry than fact, but the eerie truth underneath it is real. A piece of that deadly glow is still with them, and will be for centuries. A permanent, invisible monument to what was done. The Radium Girls were sold a miracle that was really a poison. They were told to lick the brushes. They were lied to, dismissed, and even smeared by the people responsible. And when their own bodies were failing them, they found the strength to stand up and fight, not just for themselves, but, as it turned out, for all of us. Every time a worker today is protected by a safety law, or handed protective equipment, or given the right to say, "This job is making me sick," and be taken seriously, there's a little bit of the Radium Girls in that. They paid the ultimate price for a lesson the world desperately needed to learn. So the next time you see something glow in the dark, maybe give a quiet thought to the ghost girls who glowed and who changed everything. If you like history that's true, strange, and told straight, subscribe. We've got a whole world of it. See you in the next one.